I've mentioned in a few of my videos before that talking into a camera is not something that I find easy to do. Over time, I've managed to find ways to improve my method for how I do it. First, I write a script. I'm better at writing than I am at talking, so I find it easier to put into words what I want to say. I'll then bring that script into the workshop so I can refer to it, and I try to memorize a couple of lines and then film them. And sometimes what comes out of my mouth isn't exactly what's written, but as long as it's coherent and I'm happy, I move on to trying to memorize the next couple of lines and film them, and so on. The problem with that method is that it takes a lot of time, and if I could have a visual prompt in front of the camera, it would be a huge improvement. On some of my older videos, what I would try to do is position a screen either slightly above or slightly below the lens of the camera, and that didn't work well at all. I got a lot of comments on those videos about the fact that I wasn't looking directly at the camera lens, and that doesn't make for a great viewing experience. The ideal solution is to get a teleprompter, which is what the professional TV studios use. However, they're quite expensive to buy. They cost hundreds of pounds for something that is actually quite simple when you look into it. Basically, it's just a piece of glass angled at 45 degrees in front of the camera lens, surrounded by a black fabric or case to restrict the amount of light shining on it. The camera sees the subject through the piece of glass, which doesn't really affect the image quality in a noticeable way, and the subject looks at the glass, seeing a reflection of what is written on a screen that sits below the glass. The words on the screen are mirrored so that the reflection that the subject is seeing reads correctly. This allows the viewer to see the subject with their full eye contact looking towards the camera lens, and the subject gets to read through the words reflecting on the glass without having to memorize any lines. So in this video, I'm going to have a go at making one, and as usual, I'm just going to be using salvaged materials or whatever I have available already. I have a workshop with lots of tools, and I'm going to use those tools in this video. So if you're watching this trying to learn how to make a teleprompter and you don't have lots of tools, then you might want to find a different video. Having said that, everything I do in this video you can probably do with simple hand tools like a handsaw and a cordless drill. So let's get on with the build. I had a thin scrap of plywood that I could use to get started with this project. For the screen, I intended to use this, my old Lenovo Yoga tablet. It has a cracked screen, but it still works fine. I positioned the screen onto the ply and marked up for the size, leaving about 20mm around it, and then I made the cuts at the table saw to cut two pieces to the same size. So the piece that I'm making here is like a hood to block light coming in. I glued these pieces together using wood glue and hot glue. The wood glue will provide strength, and the hot glue was used just to speed things up because it dries very quickly, and I wanted to get on with the project without waiting for the wood glue to dry. I then used some more hot glue to seal the edge, mainly to fill any small gaps. And I had a piece of MDF which I could use to make some triangular side panels for the hood. I marked up the shape I wanted onto the MDF and then cut it out using the bandsaw. Again, I used wood glue and hot glue to secure the sides, holding them in place for a few seconds until the hot glue set. And then I sealed the corners again with hot glue. Next, I'd use some small scraps of wood which will later hold the glass in place. I offered them up and marked them for size and cut them at the bandsaw. Those pieces would hold the glass on one side, and I held them in place, marked a line, and then marked up to cut some more scraps to hold the other side of the glass. None of this needed to be done accurately. I'm really not going for perfection here. The teleprompter just needs to work. It doesn't need to look pretty, and I didn't want to spend ages making it. So here you can see the two pieces of wood which will be fitted to support the glass in between them. Before securing these pieces, I first needed to scrape off the old finish from the MDF so that the glue would adhere, and I used a chisel for that. They were glued on in the same way, again with two types of glue. I had some cheap black spray paint from the pound shop, and I used this to paint the inside of the hood. This will help to reduce light reflecting on the inside of the hood, and help to make the words displayed on the glass more visible. I could then measure up for the size of the piece of glass that I needed. I had a couple of old picture frames in my loft which I could salvage the glass from, and cutting glass to size isn't something I am particularly good at, so I already knew that this might take more than one attempt. I used a Sharpie pen to mark up the size onto the glass, and I used a simple glass cutting tool to score the glass using a ruler to guide the cut. The first score went really well and the cut was nice and clean. The second did not. Whoops. There's obviously a knack to this that I've not yet gotten to grips with, but luckily I had another piece of glass from a second frame. And the second attempt went really well. Yes. I found a couple of old hinges to use for the lid of the box and I screwed those in place. The shortest screws that I had were longer than the thickness of this plywood, so I came back with my angle grinder to grind back the tip of the screws on the other side. I found another scrap of ply to use for the lid and I screwed that onto the hinges and then closed the box, marking up the shape I wanted the lid to be. And then I could remove the screws from the hinges, cut out the shape and reattach it. The lid got painted black too. Next I needed to measure the size of my camera lens, and there was no easy way to film this. I found the centre of the lid and then used a hole saw bit to drill a hole the size of the lens. Next I could fit the glass, but first I used some glass cleaning spray to make sure that the inside face was nice and clean, as this will be difficult to clean once it's fitted. I used hot glue again to secure the glass. And then I could attach the outer trim pieces. Then I needed to figure out a way of keeping the hood open, and I had another scrap of wood which I could use for this. I keep lots of salvaged screws, nuts and bolts, as you never know when you might need one. Eventually I found a bolt that was the right length and that had a nut that fitted it, so I drilled a hole through the side of the box and also through the end of the piece of wood. I then shaped the end of the piece of wood at the disc sander so that it was rounded. I added the bolt, then the piece of wood, then a washer, and finally a wing nut to secure it. And after cutting the scrap of wood to the right length, it worked nicely. I wanted to find a way of fitting the teleprompter to my tripod so that I could have the ability to adjust the position of it in front of the camera lens. And originally I thought about removing the tripod head so that I could attach a nut to the bottom of the teleprompter lid, but then I decided I could instead make something to slot inside the tripod head mount. And you can see here it opens and closes with a simple screw clamping mechanism. After taking a measurement, I found a thin scrap of oak that I could use. I added a bevel to each edge using my block plane roughly at a 45-degree angle. And that worked out really well. So I added glue and a couple of pin nails to secure it to the lid. I did some final sanding and wiped on some boiled linseed oil just to tidy up the look of it a bit. And I blew away the dust using my air blower. So now I can add the teleprompter to my tripod, and I can change the height of that and the position using the tripod ball head. Then I can use my homemade mobile camera stand to position the camera lens through the hole of the teleprompter. And by the way, the mobile camera stand was featured in a previous project video. So does it work? Yes it does, but the project wasn't a total success, and let me explain why. Originally I was planning to use my tablet for displaying the text on the glass, and I was going to control that using my laptop so that I wouldn't have to keep reaching over to the teleprompter to move the script forwards or backwards. I found a free teleprompter website called qprompter.com, and that worked well, and I used an app on my tablet called Space Desk to mirror what was showing on the laptop screen. So basically the tablet was showing exactly what was on the laptop screen, and that kind of worked, but there were two problems. Firstly, this setup relies strongly on Wi-Fi, and I don't have a great Wi-Fi signal in my workshop. But the biggest problem was that the screen of my tablet reflecting on the glass was too big. So when I tested it by recording me reading through some text, you could see that my eyes were moving around too much and it looked a bit rubbish. So what I needed was a smaller screen, something that wasn't much larger than my camera lens. So using my mobile phone seemed to be the best option, but then I needed to find a way to control a teleprompter app on my phone from in front of the camera, again without having to reach over and move it backwards and forwards. So I bought this Bluetooth remote on Amazon, and I didn't have a clue if it would work or not, but I figured I could send it back if it didn't. When it arrived, I downloaded various teleprompter apps on my iPhone, and it seemed like none of the free apps would let you control it from a Bluetooth remote. And that's okay, I was happy to pay for an app if necessary, but then I found an app called Parrot Teleprompter, and that worked with the remote really well. And that app was free too. I'll leave a link to this Bluetooth remote in the description box below in case you're interested. It works best when the screen brightness on the iPhone is up full, otherwise the reflection of the display on the glass can be a little difficult to read. So the only problem with this project that I'm left with is that I could have made the teleprompter much smaller. It could have been made roughly half the size of this one, but that's okay, I can always make a smaller one later down the line. So now I have a setup that works really well, and if you want to know how it looks while I'm using it talking into the camera, well, I'm actually using it now, so hopefully you guys didn't notice that. And I also used it at the start in the first 2 minutes of this video. That was the first time I'd ever used it. I'm really pleased with how this works. It's definitely going to save me a lot of time trying to memorize what I want to say in my videos. And it only took a couple of hours to build too, so it was time well spent. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already for more weekly woodworking videos, and thank you for watching.